Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're looking to level up your web development skills, then you're in the right place. Today we are diving deep into creating dynamic and responsive forms with React hook form, Zod and Zod validation, and some awesome UI components from ShadCN UI. So let's get started. Okay, the first thing you're going to do is, as always, you can install Next.js. I assume you know how to install Next.js. But if you don't, you can check my channel. I've shown the steps already. We're going to dive in directly to ShadCN UI components. So we can move into our browser and search for ShadCN UI. So you can search inside your browser like this, and then you can just go inside ShadCN UI. And then you can click on components section, and then you can go on the form. Okay, great. If we click here in the components section, when you click form, we have a quick introduction here. So we have a way in which you're going to implement forms. So this is not the normal way you when you use HTML tags, HTML elements for forms. This one is a special way we handle forms. In fact, even the documentation says forms are tricky. That's why I've created just this special tutorial dedicated just to forms, because the way you handle it, there is a structured manner in which we are supposed to handle it. But don't worry, I'm going to break the steps down into something that is simple and you can follow and you can implement in your own project. Great. Let's go back below here and you can see what to do. So we have the first step, as always, we need to add the form. But before we add the form, we have to install ShadCN UI. So you can come here, installation here, tab, click on installation, then you can click Next.js, and we just need to copy this command for npm. So I'm going to copy this command, then go back inside Visual Studio, and inside the terminal, I'm going to copy and paste and allow it to install. After correct installation, you should see this message here: success, project initialization completed. You can now add components. Great. Now, this is our home page and it actually has nothing in it. Also, you can run the server so that it can be running on the background. Great. Let us go back to ShadCN UI and see the steps. We have already done this. Okay, the next thing is just go back to the forms. After installing ShadCN UI, you can add the form like this: npx shadcn at latest add form. If I'm just going to copy this command, go back in my terminal, and then I can add form. So inside the terminal, you can just paste that command. Great. If you have done that correctly, we can go and back to the documentation and look at the next steps. So we have different steps, and I'm going to show you how to go over each step. Therefore, let us just go to the first step, whereby we create a schema. Since we are using hooks, we have to declare our home page. This is your home page. You can clean it and make it just look like this. You can delete everything and just leave an empty function like this. Since we are using React hooks, we need to declare this home page as use client. It's going to be a client component. And we can install the following. We need to install the following. We need to import Z, or rather, let me put some comments here so that it can become easier to follow. So we have this. Great. So this is imports for the first step. Great. So the first import, we have to import Z from Zod. So just import Z from Zod. Zod will be used to define our form schema. Great. Therefore, this first step, we are importing that, and we have to define the form schema. Therefore, just comment and write this. Great. After importing form, or after importing Z from Zod, we need to define the shape of our form. So we'll declare constant form. So it's constant form schema. This is the shape of our form, and we'll be using z. So we say z dot object. Inside the object, you're going to pass in the shape of a form. So normally forms can have, let's say, username. So we can have here username as the first property. We'll start with first a single property, then I'll show you how we can implement using multiple properties. Okay, and the username, we have to provide a type. So you just write z.string. Great. Another property is the min. So it can have a minimum of two, let's say 2 digits. And finally a max. You can also provide the maximum, let's say at 8 digits. Great. So the first step, we have imported z from Zod, and we've declared the shape of our form. Great. Now we have to import, for step 2, we have to import the use form and the Zod resolver. Therefore, I'll just add another comment here, and I can call it step 2 imports. I'm using steps so that it can be easier to follow. So we have step 1, this is the import for step 1, and we're also going to have import for step 2 here. We need Zod resolver, therefore just import Zod resolver. And we're getting it at hook form / resolver / Zod. Okay, great. This should be resolvers. Great. Next, we have to define our form. So inside this div here, we can define actually we can define our form just before the return function. So we can say constant form is equal to use form z dot infer, which is type of form schema. So z dot infer type of form schema. Great. Therefore, this form will have these properties of form schema, the one that we have just described here above, form schema. Let us finish this form definition. Inside the form, we're going to have the resolvers and default value. Therefore, we can see we have definition here, some suggestions here, which is correct. Therefore, I'm going to accept this. So we have resolver, which is Zod resolver, and default value, which is username. I have accepted because we only have a single, at the moment, we only have a single label, which is just username. As you can see, we have some red line here. So we need to import use form. If I'll come here, we had already, okay, it was supposed to be use form, not use form context. Correct. We have imported use form. Great. And that has resolved that error. The next step, we have to define the onSubmit function. So I'll just come here below this form definition, and we can declare another function called onSubmit. Therefore, I'll just write function onSubmit. And this onSubmit function is going to receive some parameters. And these parameters, let us just call them values. And these values will be of type z.infer type of form schema. So the values will be z.infer. We have a suggestion here, which I'm going to accept, type of form schema. Great. Next, we can just console log the values. So inside this function, at the moment, we can just console log the values. in production, maybe you'll be sending the values to your database, but at the moment you just console log the values. But one thing you can notice is that we are receiving these values, which are a type of form schema, and our form schema has a username here, a username. Therefore, if I had more values, I can just, let's say, values dot. So we have suggestion here. So you can see at the moment you only have one property, which is the username. Therefore, you can just console the username property. But at the moment, let us just leave it as values. So if we had another property, then it will be visible here. Finally, we need to finish the last step. The last step is building our form. If I'm just going to here and have a comment, it's going to be step 3. And you can just write building our form for step 3. Normally, in a typical form, you would want to use, let's say, a button or an input. Great. Therefore, we need to use a button. And since I'm using shardcn, I would like us to use for shardcn and also an input for shardcn. Therefore, you can just go back inside the documentation, and then you can check for, let's say, for a button. Great. Just to include a button in our project, we can just use this command npx shardcn add button. Great. We can just copy the command. Then in our project, we can add the button inside the terminal. And another thing we need is the input. Therefore, you can just go back. The way you've added this, you can just, instead of going back, you can use the same command npx shardcn at latest add, but this time it will be input. Great. After adding the button, we can also add shardcn input by using this command npx shardcn at latest add input, and then you can press enter to install. Let us import the input and the button from shardcn, the one that we have just installed. If I'm just going to write import, and this time we're going to import the button, and we're importing from /components/ui/button. Great. And you also need to import the input. Great. We have just imported the input and the button. Now, one thing we notice is that, okay, let me just drop this down. One thing you notice is that whenever you install something from shardcn, it creates a unique folder inside the components, and the name of the folder is UI. For example, we have the button and the form. Anyway, we have button, form, and label. But the key thing is whenever you install something, for instance, you've just installed the button. So we have button here and input. Therefore, it's going to create these files. Finally, let us import form. Therefore, you can just come here below Z, or let me just import it above here. Just going to import form. So it is import form, capital F, and we're importing it from components UI form. So we have the form. Another thing we want to import still from the form, so we can check this form. What does it export? You can just go back inside components, UI, then form. So it exports the following. So we can just import all this. We have form, form field, form item, form label, form control, form description. Let us go back and we can import this because we're going to use this. Let us also import form control, and we can also import form description. Let me drop it down here, form field, and finally form item. It's so cluttered, so allow me to drop it down here so that it can become more clear. Okay, and form item. So form item, this one here. Finally, form label and form message. Therefore, form label and form message. We're going to use to see the use of each. Just ensure you have this form control, form field, form description, form item, form label, and form message. Great. Let us now go and see how we're going to use them. Just below here inside our return function, here is where we're going to use it actually. Great. Let us call the form. So form with capital F, and inside the form we're going to pass in the fields. So space, then the field. So we'll be using a spread operator and then field. Spread operator means everything. So even if you just hover here, the field you can see we have it has type of any. Okay, but we are capturing everything from the field. Inside this form here, we're going to call this form that we had declared here, this form here. So just inside it, let us call the form. So we'll call the form with small f, form, and we have to give it an on submit. So I'll just pass on submit. Inside it, I'll just write form dot handle submit. Great, and I'm going to pass this function here on submit, so that it's whenever we click submit, it's going to call this function here. Therefore, inside it, I'm going to pass on submit. And finally, I can just give some CSS here and just give a class name immediately after this on submit, and give a class name here. It is going to be space the y direction, okay, of 8. Okay, just a minor correction. This one is not supposed to be field, but form. So we're getting all the fields from the form. So it's supposed to be form, small f, so that we capture everything for the form. Next, we need to call the form field. If I'm just going to call the form field. We had already imported this, so it's just form field. Form field is a self-closing element, but it has the following properties. So the first property that it has is the control. Therefore, we'll just type control. Inside the control, you can just pass form.control. Great. It also has another property. The second property is the name, which stands for the label. So we can just give it a name. Let me just call it the username. That is the name of the form. Finally, we have another property, which is a function known as render. So even if we hover here around the form field, you can see render is missing. Therefore, the next property is render, which is a function. So I'll just write render. Render is equal to, and let me just break this down. Inside it, we're going to have an arrow function. An arrow function is going to receive the fields, or rather the field, and then we have an arrow function here. Great. Then we can expand this arrow function. Inside the arrow function, we need to pass the form item. Therefore, I'll just call form item. We had already imported this, so just form item. Inside the form item, we're going to have the form label. So just form label. And you can see we have some suggestions here. Form label, and the name is username. Yeah, this is true. So you can just pass that. But for the input, I don't want to pass the input here. I'll show you where we're going to call it. Great. Therefore, we have the form label. The next item, after the label, we're going to have the form control, and inside the form control, you're going to call, let me delete this button. So we'll have form control, and inside the form control, we're going to call the input. So therefore, it's form control. And now we can call the input. An input expects a placeholder. Therefore, inside the input, I'm going just to write placeholder. This one is going to be the placeholder for the input, and I can just write enter your username. And you also need to pass the fields. Great, and you can just pass the field. So you can use a spread operator to pass everything. Great. After form control, you need to have a form description. This one is going to describe what the form does. Inside the form description, you can pass the message that we want. And the message can be, we can just write, this is your official, or we can just write, this is your public name.
And the last step is just to call the submit button. Okay, I have a suggestion here which is correct, therefore I'm just going to accept it. Great, we have button which is type of submit, and the name of the button is submit. And where you put this button is just before closing this inner form here. Great, and you can just have a look at our website and move inside our website and see. Great, we have this. I'll zoom this out. We have username. We have put the maximum number of characters to be 2. Therefore, I'm just going to try out with at least 1 character. Okay, we have an error. We must have at least 2 characters. So let me add another character. Great, and we can see we do not have any characters. So this form validation is very, very important to use and very easy, and it ensures that you have a type safe form validation. We can also console in our on submit function. We had to console the values. Therefore, you can just right click on these 3 dots here. Then you can move directly to developers functions or developer tools. You click on more tools, then developer tools. Then you click on the console here, and I just want to see the values that we are sending. Oh, great. Let me just type them some values here. So I can just type like my name is Daniel. And when I click submit, you can see the on submit function is just consoling the values that you are sent, which is Daniel. So it doesn't matter the name that you are typing. So you can actually use this. It's very important if you're working with a database. And I think whenever you're making any kind of website, you must have a form validation. You cannot escape this. You must have a form in your application. And this is the best way we can do it. Now, the next thing I'm going to try is to have multiple fields, because in your application, I think it's most of the cases, you're not just going to have one field, you're going to have multiple fields. Let us go back in our application and add another field. For instance, we have a username here, and we can just add password. Great. I'll move inside my VS Code and I'll come here. So to add another field is very easy. You come here inside your form schema, which is the shape of your form, and you can add another. Ensure you have this comma here, so you can add another one, and you can just call it password. Okay, great. And we have to provide the type of the password, so we can just say z.string is a string. Great. Next is to provide the minimum numbers of characters. So I can just pass min, and the minimum, let's say we want a password with a minimum 4 characters, and also a maximum. Let's see the maximum. Let me just put a maximum of 5 so that you cannot enter more than 5. Great. Another thing we can also put here is the default value. We need to add the password field. Therefore, I'll just come here and add password. And the default value can be an empty string. Great. We have a form field here for username. Great. And we also need to add another form field for the password. To add for password is very simple. What you need to do, or what you need to know, is that here the form field here contains the first form field. So I can just add a comment here on top and say this is the form field for the username. Great. We have, this is the form field for the first username, and you just need to copy this form field. So the closing of this form field is here. Now we're just going to copy this form field, and we can edit so that it can become for our password. And before we edit this, maybe I'm just going to add another comment and say this is the form field for the password. Great. We have the second form field for the password. So the name, we have to change the name property and we'll assign it password. And the label will not be username but password. Great. So instead of enter your username, we'll say enter your password. Great. And we can just say inside the form description, you can say this is your secret password. And I think we are done. Just as simple as that. And you can check, and everything remains just the same. And you can check in our browser. And when you go in our browser, you can see we have two forms. So the first one is for the username, and the second one is for the password. And this is the way you can add multiple fields. And what Zod does, it's going to validate all of these forms at the same time. So let us go back and try and just put some values inside the username. I'll put 2 names okay, and then the password, we said a minimum of 4, but let me just put 2 for testing purposes. Great, and you can see we have an error. It requires at least 4 characters, which is great. Also, let me remove 1 character from the username, and you can see we also have another error. So Zod is very important, and it validates your form very easily, and it ensures whatever is sent in the database has the right structure or the proper structure. Okay, let me just put some values here which is correct, and you can also see in the console we are not consoling anything because the form has some errors. But once I put the required format here, I can submit and we can see the values. Great. You can see we have username is SD and password is this, which is correct, and you can play around with this. So this has been a short tutorial on how to use forms, and I feel it's very, very important that we have just dedicated this episode entirely for forms, because forms are tricky as the documentation says, but I hope I've made it easy for you so that you can implement in your own project and you can have a successful project. I wish you success, and subscribe if you have not done so, and thank you for watching. See you in the next one.